are in this great big world of
Good
ours.
morning. Good
I
morning, Nikki.
have Peter Persson, who is the Global Director of Prayer Initiatives. And so, Peter, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself. So, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Peter. I'm in Littleton, Colorado right now. I'm from Southern California originally, but spent most of my life in Austria with my wife, Celeste, and the children when they were still home. We have two children and five grandchildren. And we've been in the States almost 4 years now and feel very much here at home in Colorado. We never had lived here before. This was a new place for us, so we started over again when we returned to the States, and we found a local church that became our home. And yeah, this is sort of real briefly my story.
Well, we'll get more into the stories we get on.
Right.
And that, as a reminder to everyone who's watching, I see there's three of you online. As everyone who's watching, do not feel you're interrupting us when you put comments in the chat. We want you to interrupt us. We want to hear from you. You have questions about the topics we're talking about. We definitely want to hear from you. This is not a one-way conversation. This is a two-way conversation. So
Exactly.
we want to hear from you. So leave your comments in the chat. Let's first talk about you recently went to Austria on a ministry trip.
We did.
Yes. What was your favorite Austrian dish and or custom from both in your past and what makes it different in the present too? Because this you served in Austria before, but now you went back as a ministry visit.
Yeah. Um, I love eating. Um, a weakness I have is I can't describe things, to satisfy people well. So um, I we went. My wife and I were there for not quite or a little over 2 weeks, I think it was, and we went to our favorite restaurants and ordered our favorite foods. And I don't know English names for them, but cordon bleu is a
Mhm.
favorite. It's a beaten down, I think, turkey, and then they put cheese and ham inside of it, bread it, and deep fry it, and it's worth dying for, actually.
I've had that with chicken, not turkey, but yes,
Okay,
that is
maybe it is chicken. I forgot. And then another favorite that I ordered was it's a pot roast with sauerkraut and a dumpling made out of day old bread. It's how they historically, would use day old bread is they'd make these dumplings. It's just delicious. And then another thing that was the former emperor's favorite. It's called Kaiserschmarrn. Kaiser, you can hear the word for emperor,
good.
and it's sort of like a pancake, but it's super super thick, and they cut it up and put powdered sugar on it, and then you dip it in a cranberry sauce, I think it is,
Mm.
and it's you can eat it as an evening meal or it's a dessert. It's good for what ails you, basically. It's really really
Nice.
good.
I'll take that as in place of chicken soup any day.
Yeah. Um, the custom, you brought up the word
Yes.
custom. Um, there's a custom that I how do I say this? I didn't know about this in America, growing up in America, and it's hard for me. I'm very sensitive about culture, so I don't want to, all of America is this way and all of Austria is this way. But something I came to really appreciate in our years in Austria was meals, church meals, potlucks, for example. Um, it's an all day affair typically, or that's our experience. And we've been to, it's been a while since we've been at a potluck at a church in the States, but um,
Maybe a couple hours, but not all day.
yeah, there's an NFL game on TV waiting for us to be, waiting to be watched. So, but, in our two churches ago in Austria, we would start eating around noon and we would sometimes get home at 5.
Wow.
You just talk. You know, it's not a stores are closed. There's no shopping to do, and I I really came to appreciate sitting at a table and talking. Sometimes you take a walk in the afternoon, you know, in between the main meal and the dessert. But
Hmm.
so there's after church, you know, it would be an hour and a half before we left, typically. So it's that kind of um, connecting, you know, connection. I really, really came to appreciate through our Austrian experience.
Awesome. Mary Esther's on.
Mm.
Just answering your question, Mary Esther, the video is still going on. You might be, if you're having internet issues, then it'll look like it's buffering. So don't worry if you're off topic and you want to, you know, catch up and ask a question that we may have answered possibly. We can answer it again happily.
Oh, gladly.
Yeah. So Mary Esther, if you're having trouble, we're also on YouTube, on our YouTube account, and Twitch and Twitter, and on the website as well. But I see that you're still on, and I see that we're still streaming on Facebook, and everything looks like it's going well. So it might be just your internet connection, but it will be on. It is on YouTube right now too. So anyway, yeah, that sound. You know, having. I've only been to one potluck where it lasted pretty much all day, and it was because our church had a Super Bowl Sunday potluck.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. And it lasted just before the kickoff, I think. But yeah, the food going overseas, it sounds like awesome. It reminds me of when I went to Honduras and we had 3 o'clock coffee time with the Magdalena bread, which is memorable still today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of, you know, being in Central Europe like we were. We could travel very easily to other countries, and um, we we made it a point to order foods from the country rather than what we knew, and just hope that we weren't wasting money, you know, kind of a thing. And I don't recall us ever having regretted really ordering something, but that's just part of the perk of living internationally is eating, you know, local foods wherever we were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So tell us now, we're going to move into a little bit more of your background that you introduced us to in the beginning. Tell me a little, how did you become a Christian?
I love this story. I was a child. I grew up in a Christian home. I think I was born on a Saturday, and I'm guessing, you know, 8 days later I was in church. Maybe it was you know, another week, but that kind of family is what I grew up in. Loving parents who lived out their faith in a very modest, in the background kind of way. They were immigrants. They were very self-conscious about their English, and so they didn't really put themselves out there at church, but they were had the gift of helps. And my dad was a baker and a restaurant owner, so that's the area of ministry that they had in our local churches. Um, so I assume that I probably became a Christian when I was really, really young. But I remember we had an evangelist come to our church when turns out I was 11. I didn't remember when it was. Um, but I thought I need to make sure that I am. So that's when I became a believer. I didn't, like I said, no one wrote that down. And years later, I was going to Germany for a semester, and I spoke to an elderly gentleman from our church back then. And I said, "Do you remember when this evangelist came?" And he said, "I have no idea." And then when I was in Germany, I got a letter from him. He had been cleaning out his attic, and in an old Bible, there was one bulletin. And that bulletin announced, "This week, this evangelist is coming." And I thought, God is so gracious for that one bulletin to have ended up in Al's old Bible, that I could know when that was. I just turned 11 a couple days previous, and so that's my journey to faith. I was the kid who, memorized the Luke 2 story for the Christmas Sunday school Christmas play, and very involved. But it was, I say it was 11 at the latest then.
Awesome. And so as you got older, when did it become really like I've heard from several people, when did it become your own?
Yeah. I think high school is where I was challenged the most. I never went through a doubting season. Wandering away and then coming back. I just didn't experience that. But we made a switch to a church where I joined the youth group. Initially, begrudgingly, I was very introverted, and when we started at this new church, we sat in the back row, and as soon as "Amen" was said, there was a sprint to the car so I wouldn't have to speak to anybody. But one day I was too slow, and two people caught me from the high school group and asked if I didn't want to come. And our youth pastor then, he, I don't know why exactly, but he wanted me to become, after about a year or so, one of the officers, or on the leadership team of the youth group, to be the treasurer. So I was to count the pennies, that were put in the offering in the youth group. But that then sort of started me on a journey of being pushed, not choosing to venture too far, but that youth pastor and another one both saw something that they wanted to help along. And so the summer that I graduated from high school, for example, I and another guy led a youth group in East LA. I mean, way out of our league, culturally and maturity wise. But that sort of started a trajectory of being challenged, being pushed. So it was a matter of having help from outside, really, to move forward. But as far as my spiritual journey per se, I didn't have a doubting season like many people do. That I'm just very, very grateful for that.
Strong faith. So you are married.
Yep.
So how long have you and Celeste been married?
It'll be 49 years this year.
Have any special plans for the 50th?
Not yet, but we'd love to have our family together, whatever that might mean. We'll see.
So how did you two meet?
In that youth group.
Nice.
Yeah. The church I grew up in had a conflict I wasn't really aware of as a kid, and my parents wanted to leave the church, so we went to another one for a year, and just because it was convenient across the street from my dad's bakery and restaurant. But then we were invited to the church that became our home church. We still feel very connected to it, and that's where I met Celeste. She had moved from Idaho with her mom and a new stepdad, and she was new in school, and another girl was new in school, and they had started going to this church, Grace Baptist Church in Glendora, California. And she said, "Don't you want to go with me to church?" So Celeste went along with Debbie to church, and that's how our stories our trajectories collided with each other.
Awesome.
So youth group.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So when did you know you wanted to serve in Austria?
Well, my intention was, we're Europeans. The son takes over dad's business. It's sort of the genetic model of life planning. And so I started at a community college in business. Then I transferred to Biola, intending to be a business major. And my first Bible course was the first semester I was there, and that was the Book of Acts. It was a required course. And 5 weeks into that first semester, I realized this is what I'm supposed to do, not run a hotel, bakery, and restaurant. My dad had bought property to expand and to build on for me, basically. And so this is an important part of my journey. What I'm going to tell now, it's a little more detail than maybe you wanted, but it's
Oh, no, go ahead.
it's so important to me. When I had that realization 5 weeks into the semester, I needed to talk to Dad about this because he had been building up his business for me. And he was a baker, so he was laying on the bed about to take a nap, 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and I caught him before he fell asleep. And I told him that I think the Lord was calling me into missions. And it's my recollection that this is now 50 years ago, this February probably. It's my recollection that when I stopped that sentence, his answer started. And it was, we were in a Swedish church when I was born. And he said, when we dedicated you with Pastor Sederston, he asked us 2 questions. Do you plan to raise Peter in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? The classic baby dedication question. And then the second question was, should God call him in the missions, will you support that?
Well, that's
I
interesting.
never heard of that question being asked before.
Me neither.
And he said, he asked us that, and we said yes. And so, 5 minutes later, I had his blessing. He hadn't talked to Mom about this. Unfortunately, I was never smart enough to ask him, while he could remember such things, if he knew that question was coming or not, or was yes, the Sunday school answer you say in front of the church. I don't know. I did contact that pastor in his older years and asked about that. And he says, I don't remember asking that question, which didn't help me a lot. I don't know if he just forgot, because of age related, or that was that day. But it has to have impacted the trajectory of my life. My parents dedicating me, a few weeks old or whatever it was. And I found out this story then 20 years later. So, excuse me. Then the next semester, I went to Germany with Biola. So I had the missions thing clear in my mind.
Yeah.
And then I went to Germany for a semester with a student group from Biola. And in October, so it'd be 50 years this October, 50. I had a walk in the woods kind of moment with Jesus, that if this is where you want me to come back to, I'm happy to do that. The German thing was working for me. I'd had it since junior high. And so I came back with that in mind. Then through a series of events, Celeste and I got married. I finished college. We went up to Portland seminary to go to seminary. And there I ran into WorldVenture missionaries, appointees and missionaries. And that just seemed like a natural fit. So Germany wasn't, the only country for me, but Austria is German speaking. I liked going with our church family, so to speak, the CB movement. So that's how we got to Austria then.
Awesome. Yeah, those mobilizers and even our missionaries out there, they have a possibility of impacting people who
absolutely
planted a seed since you were a child, a small baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
That must have been a difficult conversation with your dad a little bit, though.
Well, I actually don't remember how nervous I was about it. Maybe my memory just has forgotten that, but if I was nervous, it was over in 5 minutes because I had his blessing right
Awesome.
away. So I switched majors then. I dropped the business class or two that I was taking. My professor added a study, independent study, so I can get my units back up a little bit. And
Hmm.
I stayed in the new missions program at Biola then, and graduated in '75 in missions, and then we went up to Portland to go to seminary.
Nice. So, uh, what did you feel? You tell us a bit about your history in serving in Austria. Tell us a little bit about that. Maybe some impact and some stories there. Some of your favorite stories.
We got to Austria in August of '83, and we started language school in October, I believe, of that year. Since I had had some German, it had been 11, maybe 11, 10, 11 years in between. So, it was a little rusty, but I wasn't starting at zero. So I was able to start at a class above beginners, and Celeste started at the beginning. Our daughter went to kindergarten there, and then a year later we moved to the southern part of the country. Probably too soon for Celeste. She was starting with zero, and actually discovered in that time that she had hearing issues.
Mm,
She couldn't hear some of the sounds that are unique to German.
mm,
But we thought we'd move down as soon as possible so that our daughter could get into a school down there in first grade. So she joined a class in first grade that was already going 3 months. So we did that basically for her. And we were close to 7 years in the southern part of the country, just north of what was then Yugoslavia, is now Slovenia and Italy. And the church planting was a real slog for us. It was really hard. The soil was really tough. I joined the local volunteer fire department to try to connect with guys, and that happened. But we had learned High German, like American Standard, what you hear on the news here. And then it was like and I want to say this respectfully. I hope no one's, I hope you understand the spirit of what I'm about to say.
I get it.
We learned High German, and then it was like we ended up in a rural part of Louisiana or something, where I actually thought, did we learn the right language? It was so different. The dialect was so different. And so it was a lot of faking it. But I would go with the guys to the pub after our weekly training, and they're talking 90 miles an hour, and I have no idea what they're saying. And then they turn to me and say, Peter, what do you think? I had no idea. And it was really tough for me. The first 6 months walking there, I had stomach aches, just because it was very intimidating to me to go there. But they were very gracious to me and took me in. One time, one guy was having marital problems, and he wanted me to come and visit them, and I came, and I didn't understand them. It was just so humiliating for me. Um, Part of the journey I was on, this might be interesting.
Okay.
Um, the training I had in cross-cultural ministry, what was current right then was the topic incarnational ministry. And
Mhm.
the idea, the way that was described was Jesus came from another culture to this culture, and was never accused of being a foreigner. He integrated right away.
Mhm.
They left out that he came as a baby.
That makes a difference.
It makes a little difference linguistically, for example, and whatever. But the point was, we don't live in our own bubbles. We get integrated into life in wherever we land,
Yep.
and that was part of the idea behind becoming a fireman. I just had to walk. It was that close. but it was a burden that that was really too heavy for me. And I transferred that burden to my family. So, if we were in a market, the kids couldn't talk because then people would know we were Americans. I placed that burden on my family. And in the spring of '89, the new issue of Evangelical Missions Quarterly came out talking about this very topic. It was a gal from my era who had the same professor, and she said this incarnational thing isn't working actually. They were with Wycliffe, had learned the trade language, and now we're moving into the village to learn the tribal language to translate the Bible. They built a house like everyone else had, and then the chief came to them and was so upset with them. Here we had the chance to raise the image of our village, and you build a house like ours. and she thought, you can't win at this.
Oh man.
And so for her, she said, I think it was Kenya. Let's say Kenya. She said, I can't become a Kenyan, but I can become a friend of Kenyans. And I literally, Nikki, literally felt the pressure physically leave my shoulders, because I could become a friend of Austrians.
Yeah.
That's a high goal, but reachable.
Yes.
And so, we learned German well, we learned the culture well, but not having that burden was a big, big deal.
I bet.
Yeah. So just real briefly, we were in church planting. It didn't go well. We closed that down. We moved to Vienna, and that's where we found our niche. I'm not a church planter. I'm a shepherd, a church developer. So most of our ministry was in local church, doing leadership development and church development, and did some other things. Also with the mission, we were regional supervisors. So we traveled a bit in Europe, visiting our teammates.
Awesome. So as a shepherd, that seems to be the theme in your life, because you're a shepherd in some ways at WorldVenture. Tell me about, when did you feel a calling to lead WorldVenture and global prayer? So tell us about your current role.
I had no idea. We were going to, in 2015, we assumed we were leaving Austria in 2019. And so we ministered and planned accordingly. And that's actually how it worked out. But in the fall of 18, planning to leave in the summer of 19, I had no idea what we were going to do. I was thinking interim pastoring, maybe, driving a bus between hotels and the airport, maybe. I just didn't know what we were going to do. I could not picture being, I'm not a mobilizer type. I didn't know where I would fit in. And on Facebook, Nikki, Facebook, I saw the retirement event for my predecessor, what would turn out to be my predecessor.
Doug, yes.
Doug Hazen. And I wrote him that day saying, you're retiring, congratulations. By the way, what was your job description? And he wrote back saying, don't tell me you're interested. He wrote back a few hours later, and that started a conversation with him and with Doug Custer, that maybe this could be my role. The Lord had been growing me in the area of prayer. And so sometime in this early 19, it became clear that this was going to be my future. A total surprise to me. Historically, so to speak, I never saw that trajectory happening. The Lord surprised me, but he prepared me as well for that. So that's when it started. The job description, I changed it basically together with Jeff, our president, from sort of exclusively in the direction of mobilization to praying for the nations. But Doug was the one who started. Doug Hazen was my predecessor and the first guy in this position.
Yeah, so for all of those out there, just as a reminder, you can comment or ask questions anytime during the broadcast. For the 5 that are watching right now, welcome. So basically what Peter does is every about 3 to 4 days of the week, he leads the entire headquarters into praying for the nations and praying for various different roles. So tell me, Peter, if someone, because you're such a prayer warrior, and I've observed you over the years, and you do a really good job, and you lead by example in how to have a deeper prayer life. For someone out there, where should they start if they want a deeper prayer life? You know how busy most of us are, where that on our partners and our people are watching, they're going from one thing to the next, and kids and sports and whatever. What's your advice to them?
This may sound a little counterintuitive. Let me build my case a little bit. We all know 1 Peter 5:7. Cast your cares on the Lord, for He cares for you.
Mm-hmm.
And 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 typically and rightfully so, our cares are what we're confronted with. That our daughter find a friend at school, grandma's knee replacement, employment, illness, that we get to the dentist on time. These are the cares of daily living. Obviously, my burden, my concern is that transformation of the heart, which includes prayer, doesn't fit in that category. It's not a care of ours. Lip service, of course, but do we really hunger and thirst for righteousness?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a deep, deep yearning? Does it reach the care category? The NIV 2011 says anxiety. Cast your anxiety on the Lord. I mean, it's that deep of an issue. And so, as you know, Nikki, I've spent a lot of time in the Sermon on the Mount recently, and the answer, in my estimation, is 7:7-8. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be open. So my journey on developing a deeper prayer life, counterintuitively, began with praying about it.
Awesome.
I prayed for 5 things, starting about 20 years ago, for 11 years, 5 to 6 times a week. One was for discipline. Then I won't mention the middle ones. And the last one was to grow in the ability to pray and to be still. 11 years, 5 to 6 times a week, I prayed for that.
Awesome.
God gave me discipline. People think I'm a disciplined person by nature. I'm not. Praise be to God. I've grown in that. And by the way, prayer is my ministry.
Yes.
That was not in my trajectory. God actually transformed me. So my answer is, it's sort of a boring answer, is start praying. How serious are you about that?
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to actually pray about it for months and months and months to see how the Lord wants to develop you in the area of prayer? So that's where I would start. It's not a book. it starts at the heart. How great is my desire to really grow in that area?
Awesome. So we often, one of my favorite things is talking about, always remembering what God has done in the past, to help us bring us forward, the Joshua stones and all that. So tell me about some memorable answer to prayer that helps to kind of motivate you.
Here's story time a little bit, and I'm aware of how long stories can go. I have to. I feel like I need to preface what I'm going to say by saying prayer is hard work. It's not easy, and and the Lord gave me the assignment to pray, for example, for unreached people groups. Well, the chances of me finding out about movement for a people group that I have no connection with except the Joshua Project app, I won't know answers to that. So, a lot is involved in that kind of praying.
Mhm.
But then the Lord obviously answers prayers more immediate. I remember many times saying on our calls, Nikki, some answer to prayer, and I remember I hear my voice saying, "That's very motivating, keeps me wanting to keep on praying." Unfortunately, I'm very good at forgetting, so some of those sort of acute, immediate things I don't remember right now. But to give you some answers, for example, our mobilization department through the last years has had Discover Weekends. I think that's what they're called,
Discovery weekends, I think it's called.
Discovery, where they invite people who have sort of on the periphery of WorldVenture. They're thinking about missions, and they've invited them. And even in advance, we would get the names, and I would start praying. And I've kept those lists, 2 and 3 years. Well, I see those names in the appointment process, or now considering the application actually. So that's very motivating to me to see weekly investment in praying, sometimes for seasons, daily investment, praying for names, to see them now nearing the application process. These are students, they're in college often, so it takes time to get to that point. But my favorite story, absolute favorite story, in 2018, WorldVenture celebrated 75 years, and that was in Estes Park, Colorado. And during that conference, we were given this prayer guide to pray for 6 religions, and it's called thumbs to sort of help with to remember: tribal, Hindu, unreligious, Muslim, Buddhist, and Sikhs. This was adapted by 2 of our WorldVenture people, and there are 48 prayer requests here. And so I've been praying 1 week this list, and 1 week this list. And of these 48, only 1 country is mentioned. For some reason, they added a country on one of these for one of these religious groups.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm going to say it yet. Maybe it'll slip out. It's a security issue.
Yeah, wouldn't say it then.
Yeah. So every other week, starting in 18, I was praying for this country. And I think I started in October of 18. Well, in October of 18, or that fall anyway, someone here in the States, a nurse practitioner, flew to Southeast Asia to attend a conference on how to use his health background as for community health outreach. And then after that conference, he was flying to the neighboring country where his church had a worker, and he wanted to go visit. Is this a place for us? He was very nervous that day, he said, he called his wife saying, I don't know if I should even make this trip or something like that. I don't remember the details. But he got on the plane, and there were 99.9% Southeast Asians and one white guy. And their tickets put them next to each other. And in a few minutes, they found out they were both believers. One was one of our workers in that neighboring country, where this brother that I'm talking about was flying. That worker was with WorldVenture. This guy hadn't heard of it. It's in Littleton, Colorado. He says, "Oh, I'm from Littleton." And that worker then joined WorldVenture, and they're in that neighboring, the first country. They haven't been able to get into this one yet. But then I got to be a part of his interview committee and tell him the story that I've been praying for him without knowing about them for a couple years at that point. So, that kind of story is just a God thing that would pull that off. That, prayer for that one country that was listed here, that he would get on a plane sitting next to our guy. It's just a wonderful, wonderful story.
That's awesome. Yeah, and Mary Esther's on, and Carrie Gupta's on. So they are loving hearing your stories.
Hi, Mary Esther and Carrie.
So you are retiring this year.
Yeah.
So what next on the horizon? Do you know?
It would be my nature to want things a little more nailed down than they are, but we've had health distractions, so we haven't been able to do a lot of planning that way. I do have some ideas, but Celeste said to me yesterday, don't forget to take some time before you jump into something else. I am a little bit tired, to be honest. So, and I do have a couple ideas. I'm not interested in watching YouTube videos all my life. I want to be active in ministry. It's not the point where I could say something here, but
no, that's fine.
But it is something I'm praying about and thinking about quite a bit.
Well, as we see with a lot of our people that retire from WorldVenture, they never end up truly retiring. I mean, what we have one of our retired workers who was reactivated for Bible translation recently.
Right.
So yeah, and we've got a couple others who are very active in their church. I mean, retirement is sort of just a label, but not really trajectory.
Yeah, if you have health and there is a process, there's a transition that does have to happen, and sometimes the mind takes longer to get there, but the transition will be from doing to being, and I'll have to figure out what the being looks like. What one-on-one, what smaller circle investment can I make rather than a lot of producing of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. So finally, well, we have some other topics to discuss as well. And remember, any of you that are online can ask any questions or make any comments. You won't be interrupting. How can we pray for you, Peter?
Yeah, thank you. One, I want to finish well. That's finish my time with WorldVenture well. That's a big deal for me. I don't want to have the feeling that I'm just hanging on. So that's one thing. Another thing is for a successor. We don't have a successor yet. For me, there's going to be a transition time, and there's a plan for that transition. Jeff talked about that with the mission recently. We're going to be doing some traveling this fall. starting in June, actually, throughout the rest of the year, we are given time, like missionaries returning, we are given home assignment time to visit our partners. And all of them used to be on the West Coast. We're Americans, so we move. So we're going to be doing quite a bit of traveling. We want to say thank you well, say farewell well. And so it'll be a lot of traveling. So that's an important thing as well.
Awesome.
I think those are the things that occur to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys can, if you feel led, you can put in a prayer request, write out a prayer for Peter in the message chat, and I'll make sure he gets them. Let's talk about WorldVenture topics this week. So we always post about what our workers are doing, and whatever is meaningful to any of you out there, you can feel free to share it and leave put a comment when you share it. And to show how meaningful that post was to you. That is actually helpful for making disciples online. But we had Tim and Sarah Downs that who are appointees to Africa. They posted an adorable picture of his daughter watching Tim pull out.
I saw that.
Yeah, Tim pull out from to go to a partner development or to visit a potential church partner 8 hours away. So when you were an appointee, I know that was some time ago, but when you were an appointee, how did you see God at work during your partner development phase before going to the field?
Contrary to other people, I would have to say, we didn't have any dramatic stories on how a connection was made. Our process took 2 years, and it was at a snail's pace, I would have to say. So God worked, you can say, in one way by giving us endurance for that journey. I will say at the end, once we had our full monthly support, we were $7,000 short in our outgoing funds. And there was one of our, a lay leader at our church in Southern California who was leading the evening service. And I'm guessing we must have presented something that night, but he said, Peter and Celeste are $7,000 short. We're not leaving until it's in. We did not know that was coming. And $7,000 came in, so we could go home that night, I guess.
That's probably good for everyone there.
Yeah. God did lead in a different way. And see if I can tell this quickly. The regional guy in Southern California asked us to represent WorldVenture at the U.S. Center for World Mission in Pasadena. So we stood behind a table kind of thing. And next to our table was the team mission table run by missionaries in Austria. So this was a wonderful serendipity. They invited us over and we got to know them. And then in God's providence, we landed in Vienna in an apartment 3 minutes away from them. And about 6 weeks into our time in Austria, our kids were just wrestling one night, just playing, and Nicholas fell. He was the 2-year-old and hit his head against the bed frame, and it was just gushing. And we knew we had to go somewhere. So I called Dorothy, the gal. I said, what do I do? Nicholas has injured himself. And she said, oh, call our colleagues, Barb. They have boys. So Barb told me what hospital to go to. And so we went there late at night, and I had to fill in a form,
Yeah.
Of course, and it was German, Serbo-Croatian, or Turkish, no English. And on the wall above each stack was a sample how to fill it out. And of course I could figure out name and address, Name, Adresse, but then you had to fill in what happened. And on that sample, it said, my son fell and hit his head against the bed.
That's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
My German was good enough to see that, to understand it. All I had to do was copy, and 10,000 things could have stood there. But for me, it was God orchestrating that to say, I'm with you here. And that came about because as appointees, we were standing next to the team missionaries who were Austrians, whom I knew to call then once we got to Austria. So that's sort of a partner development story, but not the classic what you intended.
Oh, no, that's awesome. In fact, Mary Esther wrote a prayer out for you, which we'll close at the end of our time with.
Thank you.
So we also had a Glenn Luke, who's in Mexico. He's been walking with someone who decided she wanted to serve in Chile, and how they spent some time fasting in their prayer time. So back onto the topic of prayer. In your prayer discipline, do you do fasting, and what kind, and why do you feel that fasting is important to you?
I have to say I'm a little sensitive about this topic because of, and I've been this way for a long time. Jesus talks about stuff like this in Matthew 6, doing things for show. And so, talking about fasting, it's sort of in the super saint category. And then to talk about fasting seems to me that you're putting yourself in this category that no one else does or maybe even wants to do. But Jesus talks about it, so we have guilt feelings about it maybe. But our church leadership in Vienna, when I was talking with them about this just before we left, said, Peter, you didn't talk to us about this while you were here. When you get to America, you talk about this stuff. And so I don't know if they had their fingers like this, but I saw that. It was a very strong rebuke to me. So I'm willing to answer the question with all of that caveat. I hesitate, but fasting is a part of my routine, but it's not a overwhelming part. I fast a meal 2 to 3 times a week, mostly related to when there's a ministry appointment, weekly stuff. And I do it. I've read and someone at church has talked about when he fasts, he feels the closeness to God, and I can't say that that's my experience. For me, the fasting is having discomfort. Is a reminder, is a trigger, is a tapping on the shoulder of hungering and thirst for righteousness, hungering and thirst for God's presence, hungering and thirst to be used by God. It's a declaration or a reminder to declare my dependence on Him and my yearning for Him to work in this moment, whether it's the elders meeting, the prayer group meeting, or Sunday morning service. I'm yearning for God's presence to be felt among us. So that's my angle to that topic. I recently did have a 3-day fast because of something I was concerned about, and I did not feel a special communion with the Lord per se. But I did see Him working in a special way a couple days later in the area that I've been praying about. I don't view that as a mathematical formula. It's something we do in obedience, and then we just leave, like Bill Bright used to say, leave the results up to God. Yeah. Our job is to get on the train, and then it takes us wherever it's supposed to go.
Awesome. No, that's absolutely a beautiful explanation. So if there's any questions, you may feel free to ask, because we're about to wrap up our time. if there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and close with this beautiful prayer that Mary Esther has written in the chat. So if you'll just pray with us as we close. So thank you, God, for Peter and Celeste's lives in ministry in Austria and now here in the U.S., making a difference in kingdom work around the world. May God continue to give you endurance to finish well and direct you in your next phase of ministry. You are now such an encouragement to us. May God bless you. And I add, Lord, in my prayer, I echo all this, that you lead Peter as you've been leading him and Celeste, and lead them where their next season will begin, as they encourage others by their example and by their words. In Jesus' name we praise. Amen.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Mary Esther. Appreciate that.
Marianne Latin says, thanks so much for this time of sharing. Blessings.
Thank you.
So thank you, Marianne. So everyone, thank you for joining us. Next week, we may or may not have a WorldVenture in review because we have a workshop led by Quincy Thompson. He is going to be leading a workshop, which registration is still open, on engaging young adults. So if you want to register for that, be great. Be watching. If we do have a WorldVenture in review interview next week, you'll see it on all our social media. And the week after that, we may have some others. So be watching. You can go to our online events under resources at worldventure.com. And thank you so much for supporting the work that all of us do at WorldVenture. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
And
Nikki.